Representation matters. But as Indigenous Chicano people, we can't just sit back and wait for mainstream media outlets to make it happen for us. And nor should we. We started the Tales from Aztlantes podcast because we believe that it is imperative for Chicanos, Chicanas, and Chicanx people to produce our own media and tell our own stories. And the way we choose to do this is by using Buzzsprout to host the podcast. Buzzsprout is by far the easiest and best way to launch a professional podcast. You'll get a podcast website, audio players that you can drop into other websites, detailed analytics to see how people are listening, tools to promote your episodes, and much more. To start your own podcast and get a $20 Amazon gift card, follow the link in the show notes. This lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and helps support the show. Buzzsprout, the easiest way to start a podcast. Now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so,
Piali Piali no Chime. Welcome to another episode of Tales from Aztlantes. Today I'm going to be going solo with the episode. Dr. Ariano Tlacatecat has schoolwork to tend to, so I'm going to be riding solo on this one. But I'm being joined today by a special guest, Yan Garcia. And actually, you're the first returning guest that we've had. This is your second episode. So,
hey, what a privilege.
Yeah, congratulations. Thank you for coming on again. It's nice to have you. Yan, for those who don't know, is a Nahuatl language instructor. He's part of an organization called Tlahtoltapazolli, which means what? Language nest?
Exactly. Language nest.
And you guys are based out of California, right? Is that where everybody with the organization is living?
Yeah, in Los Angeles area.
Cool. So what got you interested in not only teaching Nahuatl, but learning Nahuatl in the first place?
Yeah, so I wanted to learn Nahuatl since I was in high school. Now, I lived pretty far away from Los Angeles. I didn't really have much exposure, but just from reading books, I was able to, catch up and get the general gist of a lot of the Chicano history that we had. And my dad always talked a lot to me about, our background and where we came from. And he would share a lot of the culture that we have from our ranch, which is not just, has a lot of shared Mexican culture, but also has a lot of the, we have a lot of like Nahuatl words in our town that aren't really used in other towns. We have a lot of farming vocabulary that he shares with me that you don't get to hear much anywhere else. And so starting from there, I was able to kind of get exposed to researching this and just reading books. And I was in high school. And so I wanted to learn Nahuatl. I got a book, I think it was one of James Lockhart's books about how to learn Nahuatl. But it was classical Nahuatl. It was Nahuatl as written kind of thing. And, I had a lot of trouble just getting through the first chapter that I just kind of gave up, just put the book away. And it was a nice thing, but I just started reading more just general history books. It wasn't until I was in college taking Chicano Studies classes that I got forwarded an email from our professor, who's now teaching at University of New Mexico in Chicano Studies, an opportunity to learn Nahuatl in Mexico. And so, I hopped on that opportunity back as fast as I can. There weren't many Facebook groups back then. The Nahuatl community was really almost non-existent online. The only sources you could find were like linguist listservs that they kind of had back then. We had internet, but not that, it wasn't really bringing the Nahuatl community together at all, really. And you would hardly find any information online back then. Just a few websites at that time. So yeah, I had to go to spend my whole summer in Mexico and take a class through EDS, the Instituto de Docencia e Investigación Etnológica de Zacatecas. So it's an organization that partners with indigenous people who are studying and living in Zacatecas, and a lot of them tend to be from the Huasteca. And so there's already this community of this diaspora of Huastecos, because they've been leaving the Huasteca area. That's their crisis that they're having right now, that they've been having, that everyone leaves and almost no one comes back. And if they do, they come back with foreign ideologies and languages that are kind of threatening the local culture. But they had great professors who were trained through a partnership with Yale instructors, and they had pedagogy taught over from Yale, so they knew to do hands-on activities. Fun. They would always think about how to do games, interaction. That's how their class was all about. We were standing up every 10 minutes. We were trying to talk in groups every 5 minutes. We didn't take almost any grammar notes at all. And then in the afternoon, we would get to take introduction to like classical Nahuatl, which is more of the written and a little bit more grammar based. But I just loved it. I loved it. It was great. And I came back, and I didn't even know about Mecha yet. So, but I got recruited to come into Mecha and join that. And then before you knew it, I was doing workshops because Mecha, a big thing we'd have conferences and reach out to younger youth. I was really young still at that time, but I was already starting to do some the basic workshop. One day, they're 30-minute to 50-minute workshop of an introduction where we do this hands-on activity with Nahuatl. And so that's how I didn't forget it. That's how I also kept it alive with me, because it wasn't that easy to find resources or people who could speak Nahuatl.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I first started trying to learn the language, it was just a handful of websites and then some books that I had bought when I was living in Mexico. But it makes it, I don't know, it's difficult when you can't actively hear it, because you're looking at the words and you're like, am I even saying this right? Is my pronunciation anywhere close? And then the other thing was, I was learning like 3 different variants, right? But I didn't know that. So I didn't know, what words were coming from classical and modern, and from Guerrero and Central Mexico. So, Morelos. So I was like learning this mishmash version of Nahuatl that I'm sure if people heard me speaking it, they'd be like, what the hell is this guy saying?
And that's our situation. There's so much more work that can be done that, if anyone wants to get involved in creating more materials for Nahuatl, there is it's not even close to being finished or being enough, really. There's so many more books that need to be created. I try to create one to help people get into Huasteca, but there's, over 5 variants in Puebla alone. I have friends who come from certain towns and like, oh, I've heard of your variant. There's almost nothing written about your variant. There's like one list written about your variant, like a vocabulary list of like 100 words. Like that's nothing. That's not even close to what it should be, to have all these, we need these books. We need more resources to be published and created for us.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that I like about your book is it's focused on modern speakers, right? So yeah. I noticed that, because I'm a danzante, I go to the ceremonia and I do the danzas and stuff. And the one thing I've noticed within danza communities is this desire to only study classical, what they call classical Nahuatl. And that's cool, right? Like, if that's what you want to learn, then by all means, do it. But there seems to be like a
preference.
Yeah. Like people just don't feel very compelled to speak the modern variant. Like if it's not just important to them, like they want to learn the classical of what the ancient Mexica spoke, right? And what I like about your book is the emphasis on learning a modern variant of Nahuatl, because that's why I study Nahuatl, because I want to be able to speak with people. I want to be able to go to Mexico and communicate with other individuals. Yeah.
It's one thing to hear someone tell you about their culture, it's another thing to understand it because you can speak the language and be like, oh, I get exactly what's going on in this ceremony. I get exactly what they're talking about in the ceremony, the incantations, and every aspect of life. Really, it's involved in all those things.
So I believe right now there are, I think, at least 63 recognized indigenous languages in Mexico, right? 63.
Yeah, and some of those have sub varieties within themselves that don't understand each other. It's not very clean. It's not a clean, easy process thing to do.
Yeah.
Like you can have something like a web. Think of a spider web where varieties that are close to each other can understand each other, but the ones that are far away from each other might have a little bit more difficulty, that you could almost say that they're separate languages. But it's like, it always depends on from whose perspective are you asking, you know? So even then you can't just say, oh, there's 4, let's say Mixtec languages. No, it just depends on which town. It's so relative, from where to where. It's hard to create lines, and what do we consider one language starts and the other one begins?
Yeah, exactly. And then within Nahuatl, I believe the Huasteca variant is the largest, right? The most widely spoken.
Yeah. And there's certain towns that do little small minor changes within each other that, if you want to get all nitty gritty about it, you could divide it up into sub varieties too. But it's easy to consider it one big variety that altogether makes up at least half of all Nahuatl speakers. So if anyone wants to learn a spoken variety of Nahuatl, that's why I recommend the Huasteca one. The pronunciation is so similar from classical. It keeps the TL sounds there. It keeps the preference for O over U kind of thing. It's a lot of it is very similar to classical because it's considered very conservative. They haven't changed a lot of their sounds. So if you're just talking about the sounds, it's relatively conservative there. And you get to speak with native speakers today. We're still alive in communities, So we're almost 1 million people just in the Huasteca who can speak it.
So Tlahtoltapazolli, are you one of the original founders of the organization, or how did this organization come about?
Yeah, I got in. There were people who knew that I was occasionally doing workshops here and there, that I was someone to talk to if you wanted to learn or translate things into Nahuatl, etc. And so someone, he was involved with like a local chapter with AIM, asked me to give a class in Nahuatl. And he said he had some friends who wanted to learn. So I was like, okay. I've never done it in Los Angeles before, like an actual course. I did one in Orange County before. That was just a course of 10 weeks or something like that, So I was like, okay, I'll do the same thing, do a course for 10 weeks in Los Angeles. And, because I realized quickly that it gets problematic where I had to do a start and stop point all the time, because, we'd get new people coming in and they'd be like, well, we're already 5 classes behind. I definitely want you, if you came here to learn, I want to include you. But at the same time, the people who've already come 5 times, it's this really hard balance, trying to keep everyone happy and do what's right for everybody. And I'm only one person, right? So we had that situation. So I was like, okay, I think what I have to do is just create a start class and then do a 10-week period, and then we'll end. And usually after some time, people's interest, there are some people who are like, okay, I really have to study or put effort into this. And they're like, I just wanted, a little exposure. I don't actually want to speak it fluently necessarily. So then, after, people's commitments or things happen, life happens. So I had to create a start and stop point. But when we started in LA, we created an announcement that we're gonna meet at this park. We don't have a space. The rent in LA is insane.
I bet.
And I'm not affiliated with any universities to just go in there and use the space. You got to really be part of a student organization. Otherwise, you have to get insurance and all these. It's this whole other system that it's a whole it's a whole very American system that's involved in all this. So we just did it at a park, and I made a little announcement on the local radio, KPFK, and next thing you know, like 55 people showed up at the park.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a huge crowd.
And you were the only teacher?
And I was the only teacher, yeah.
Oh, man.
But luckily, I try to do well. You can probably tell I have a pretty soft voice, so I'm not very good at projecting my voice very loudly. But I did with what I could, and knowing that you can do methods that are we're standing up and we're interacting, and I teach them a little drill, and people practice it, and they do it in groups with each other. It's actually not that hard to manage it. So it started off like that, and I was like, okay, so everyone's like, okay, so the class is over, now what? I'm like, okay, I guess we'll meet back here next week, next time, same time next week. And yeah, people came back, and the group stayed pretty big for a long time. And we were just doing it outside the park as long as we could, except for, well, it doesn't really rain too much here in California anyways. But we kept it going there for a good amount of time. I got to meet a lot of people who just come from all different kinds of circles, especially the danza circles, but every kind of circle, every part of social life we got coming there, especially Chicanos, but people of other backgrounds too who came out, and we kept it going. Diego, who's now one of our teachers, he was already familiar. He was taking class. He was learning Guerrero Nahuatl. So he had some familiarity already, but this was something new for him, Huasteca Nahuatl, everyone else, Steph was already learning a little bit of Nahuatl too with EDS, but everyone else was a beginner. And before you knew it, people who were students eventually became teachers, because that was my whole thing. The classes kept going every weekend. I soon realized, hey, this is going to be a big commitment. Like, people are really, really interested in Los Angeles. Like, there's a big interest here, and I'm trying to fill a gap in the community, this need that happens that we have. And like, we ain't got no money. We're not a nonprofit. We don't have grants or anything like that. So I'm just, I'll pass around a little donation box if anyone wants to help out, pitch in for my gas. I'm happy with that. So eventually we got kicked out of the park. They were building in these fancy new apartments next to the park, and it probably looked bad. They're trying to bring in a certain kind of people to the apartments.
Yeah, a bunch of Chicanos just hanging out in a circle, speaking a weird language. Like, what the hell's going on here?
So yeah, the police eventually came, and they're like, "You guys have a permit for this?" I'm like, "Geez, you need a permit to get together at a park, I guess." So we're like, man, we're trying to this is the difficulty where we're trying to revitalize and revitalize a big part of our culture, but we're starting without our traditional institutions, where every other culture has allowed their institutions to survive to this day, that they can rely on each other for money. We had this giant, beautiful Hindu temple in around here in Chino Hills. It's amazing. And the way they built it is the community got together and pitched in money for it, because they already have their own churches and institutions. And for us, a lot of our money goes to like Christian or Catholic churches. And more it's Christian versus Catholic these days. So we have to build these institutions ourselves, from scratch, so we can have our own spaces. And so some people are doing that. And we found a group who was doing that in Los Angeles, who they have this small building, but they use it for all these cultural events that are happening in Los Angeles. And so we got involved, and they offered us a space that we could use on one time a week. And so we kept going using that space. And my mission now was, okay, I need to train these guys to be my teachers. And before long, I had them, I had a group of my students give the first lesson of the introduction. Like, you guys, y'all know the beginning parts already, so it helped me. I think it could be really good for y'all to do it yourselves. So I'm just gonna watch you guys. I'm just gonna watch y'all do it, but y'all have the resources you need already. So yeah, I just threw them in there, and they literally told me they didn't like that.
Sink or swim, Nahuatl style.
Yeah. But they told me that they really appreciated it afterward, because they really grew a lot like that. When you're the teacher, when you're sharing the information that you taught, you're sharing your notes to someone, you're like, oh, wait, I have these gaps in knowledge here. Mm-hmm. And what you do know, you're like, I know it even better. Like, it's cement.
Absolutely. I find that too. Like the more I'm able to teach something, the better it makes me. And like you said, it reveals to me what I don't know. So stuff that I need to focus more on, but it also helps my understanding. So I think getting people to teach is a great strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And I got part of this. There's this method out there called "Where Are Your Keys?" We can go into it more later if you want, but they have a lot of principles, and they work a lot with California native tribes or tribes on the West Coast, small tribes that we have a lot of languages where on the West Coast where we only have a dozen of speakers left, sometimes 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 1, sometimes the last one just passed away. And so, they can't easily create this program where like, how are we going to teach the teacher to teach? There's not enough resources to teach every elder to be able to spend all their free time to teach the next generation. Like just being realistic, it just can't happen like that. There's not enough resources for that. So they found methods where it's again focused on interaction, and there's certain kinds of interactions you want to have that help you help the students pick up on be kind of like hunters, where they're looking for the knowledge themselves instead of just being like passive, like give me the knowledge, but learning how to be a hunter in the language, to go out and actively look for the information you need and create situations where you can get that. But one of their philosophical things they have too is like, where are you on a scale of 1 to 5 on how well do you know this material? And if you're a 3, you can still teach someone who's a 2 or who's a 1. If you're a 4, maybe you're not all the way an expert, but you can still teach everyone who's down here. So that's what I did too, because I don't know, I can't think of every single Nahuatl word off the top of my head if someone asked for a translation, because I would if I actually got to live in the Huasteca, but my life is over here, and this is where I'm at, and I got my roots over here. So I haven't been able to do that. But but there are native speakers who have that, who can give you all these words on the spot really fast and tell you, how you use that word and what it implies if you use that word, all these kinds of things. So maybe I'm a 4, but I can still teach everyone to get to my level. And I want everyone who I've taught something to get other people to do that. And that way it can spread, not just be like this hierarchy where it slowly builds up like a tree, but rather spreads like grass.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. It's pretty similar because I trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's pretty similar in there where, you have the belt ranking systems, and you might not be a black belt, maybe you're a purple belt, but you could still teach the lower belts, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't instruct the black belts, obviously, but you could be, put in a position where you're basically like a coach, and you can help train the lower belts. And then once you get to brown belt, then you're, the number of people that you're allowed to train becomes wider, right? Until you get to that black belt level, and then you can teach everybody. So I think that's a good strategy to have. I think that's one thing that holds us back from a very Western perspective is you're expected to, well, no, you can't do this until you've attained this degree. And so you can't teach. You're not qualified, quote unquote, to teach. So I think, and especially something with language preservation, language revitalization, you need, every little bit of knowledge out there is necessary. And if people can teach, even if they could only teach you how to count to 10, right? Well, that's still something.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And one of the mistakes I made when I was younger was like, okay, if I want to get involved in this language work, I guess I have to study linguistics. I guess I got to dedicate my life to studying linguistics, And like, well, maybe I studied it and I love it and it's great and it has helped me in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like the basic work of language revitalization is just getting out there and doing it. The methodologies you use, they're important, but not as much as how well you use them anyway. Not as much as how much of an intuition you have on teaching, which you get by teaching anyways. You get it from experience.
Yeah. So did you guys in the organization, did you develop your own curriculum? Were you using the curriculum from EDS? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a good number of Nahuatl teachers now in Mexico and throughout the area, and I've tried to push people to work together so we can all share our knowledge, because some things that we can learn from English and about general methods of pedagogy of how to teach languages, we can apply them ourselves. We don't have to start from scratch. We can take what we know already works and use it for Nahuatl. But at the same time, a lot of the nitty-gritty details are going to be so different, because Nahuatl is just such a different language from English, that we got to start the way we're going to start, and the things that we're going to the form and the content of what we're teaching is going to be totally different. So, we're not going to teach a class where the first day, like you might do for another language, like how to get to work and how to talk about work kind of thing, this idea of job and career and what I do 9 to 5, that vocabulary is not important in Nahuatl. That's not, that's not native things you need to worry about Saturday, the days of the week and the time of the day. And at 4, this very English Western kind of thing. Like at 8 o'clock, I do this. At 10 o'clock, I do this. That makes sense like this, And it makes sense if you're learning German, Japanese, or whatever. So some of the methods is we take a lot of the EDS things to start with, because for beginners, anyone can get involved with it, all ages. We've had kids come and they can participate and pick up on things when it's dynamic just as well as adults. So that method is great. When you start getting a little bit more advanced towards our beginner to intermediate levels, we introduce a little bit of grammar. But I've always told my colleagues and my students and co-teachers too, that we want to reduce as much as we can English, giving explanations, because they've learned the grammar and now it's so easy for them and me too to fall into the trap of explaining the grammar. And it's like, if you're explaining it, you're not practicing the language. Really, you got to be practicing the language, creating situations, role playing to do it. So I have this idea, and we might not necessarily all, even myself, have gone to that ideal yet, but we're all working on it. We're all progressing toward that. But yeah, we have the EDS method. We have some sessions where we can do the "Where Are Your Keys" games. So that's that method I was talking about earlier, where you only need like 4 objects, 4 nouns, and just focus on memorizing those 4 nouns, and you can build up your knowledge of grammar using those 4 nouns. You can do things like, is this a rock? Is this a pencil? And by knowing what a rock and pencil is already, you could be like, no, that's not a pencil. You can teach how to say that in Nahuatl. That's not a pencil, that's a rock. That's not a rock, that's a pencil. Yes, that is a pencil. That's my pencil. That's your pencil. That's her pencil. Is that your pencil now? That could switch everything. Yes, that is his pencil. No, that's not my pencil. Next level. Because you gave it to me.
Yeah.
Right? Give me the pencil. I will give you the pencil if you give me the rock. Okay, it gets building up on that.
Yeah, and that seems way more effective than...
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people, when they first start learning Nahuatl, not 100% of the time, but in my personal experience, a lot of the time, the majority of the time, people start off with stuff like, colors and counting. Uh-huh. And it's like, that stuff's cool. Don't get me wrong. You should know the colors and how to count, but it's so much more helpful to actually jump right into nouns and verbs and like, how do we use these things in an actual conversation, right?
Definitely. And I see that mistakes being done in indigenous bilingual schools in Mexico. I've seen mixed Mixteco schools where they're actually do some Mixtec in the classroom with kids. That's better than a lot of schools in the Huasteca where they ignore Nahuatl for the most part, or do like 10%, a little bit of Nahuatl, but everything else is in Spanish. And yeah, that's something that they often have difficulty with. They might just teach names of animals. They might just teach colors, and it was like, well, okay, but how do I use that in a sentence?
Yeah.
How can I actually say that is, even being able to say that is a pencil, that is a dog. Mm-hmm. So not just saying dog, cat, Yeah. And I see it in local native California languages too, that I worked with young kids who are working to revitalize the local languages here. but it's just a lot of times just the animals vocabulary. So we want to do something that you can use.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'm seeing though, and something that I think is super helpful with Nahuatl, is that Nahuatl is one of the most heavily written languages, right? There's a lot of material, historical material, colonial material through the modern, where you could actually pick up a book and see Nahuatl written and interact with it in that way. And I don't know if you're seeing this happen in California amongst the California natives, but I know a lot of native groups here in New Mexico don't want their language written down, for their own reasons. But I'm like, man, should that be reconsidered? I mean, I'm not going to tell people how they should deal with their own language or teach their own language, but when you have languages that are on the verge of extinction and you're not wanting to write them down, it's like, oh man, what? I shudder to think what's going to happen to those languages.
Yeah, it's a hard situation because we have traditional things and cultural aspects that worked for the culture for a long time, but that's also at a time when we didn't have colonialism. Mm-hmm. That's threatening to wipe things out, and so everyone's got to really consider these two options. I've never heard that for Nahuatl with any native speakers. It's never been a thing. At the most, what I have seen with native speakers is if you're going to record or take pictures of any native, sometimes you have to give a good explanation of what you're doing, because people, for good reasons, obviously, even before social media and people's pictures could go anywhere, even before that, native people are more particular about you're getting a piece of them, you're kind of catching people off guard in a sense, where you're recording them, or there's a lot of mistrust there. There's traditional towns in Chiapas where if you take pictures at their sacred site, the local natives will put you in the local jail, around Chamula area, for taking a pic. They're very strict on things like that. I've recorded native elders, and they agreed to let me record them because I was like, I just want to see how you say the words.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to publish it or anything. And they asked me, all right, but you're not sharing this with anyone, right? And I had to. But they got to trust me to be where I told them, yeah, this is just for me. I can delete this when I'm done with it, of course. So sometimes with audio recordings, they just for good reason want to know that they're included in what's going on with that. But for written material, everyone's been like, oh, that's cool. That's something that's really cool.
Well, one of the things
I'll say.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, but I'll say not. When you go to certain, I also seen other traditional towns in Mexico where there's also, for most people, books just don't have an importance. If you write something down, cool. But I've made a dictionary in Mixteco, and I was passing it. I wanted to hand it out to people because they helped me create it, and the people who were taking me around, they're like, maybe don't give it to that family. And I'm like, why? They helped me. They deserve a free copy of this book. They kind of. When people ran out of toilet paper, they just use books, and
Yikes.
that's the only purpose for that.
Yeah.
Really.
This is what paper is here, buddy. You keep your book. Well, the thing I like about your book, and your book is called Learn Nahuatl, Language of the Aztecs and Modern Nahuas. It's in its second edition. And the thing I really like about the second edition is that you've adopted the Inali orthography, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've always been, before I even knew anything about orthographies, if you look at the stuff that I wrote back in 1998, 1999, I always used a K and a W. And people would give me shit for that. They'd be like, why are you doing that? There's no such thing as a W in Nahuatl. And I'm like, oh, but there's an H and a U? What are you talking about? So my whole strategy was I'm just writing this stuff down in a way that's helping me pronounce the words as correct as possible.
Sure.
And now I'm seeing more and more people using that style of writing. What caused you to change from one edition to the next, adopting this new orthography?
Well, I'll tell you, I was pretty conservative about keeping to the classical-based spelling that it imitates what was using, kind of more about the classical kind of stuff. And I was pretty hard. I'm pretty stubborn. I was pretty stubborn about even thinking about moving. And maybe I'm a rule follower like that. I'm like, no, it's been like this. You know, I was very uncompromising in that sense. But when I actually got to see that native Nahuas, who are actually like prominent people in the Nahuatl community, actually got together and thought about it deliberately, and it wasn't just some political thing, because that's the thing, that's how it gets discredited oftentimes, where it's like, oh, well, this political thing and this political thing. And there is a lot of politics involved in different orthographies. And I'm still not really much of a fan of the J's or the U's that were promoted by SEP in the 80s. It's pretty sloppy. It's like it tries to be based more on the sounds, but still falls short by relying itself on Spanish conventions by using the J, where it's not pronounced even like a J. It's not a hard J sound. So it's like imitating Spanish. It's like got the worst of both worlds, in my opinion. But I saw native Nahuas consider it, and it even asked me to consider using the new system. And when I thought about it, I was like, well, actually, it does make a lot of sense. It would be actually easier to teach people to use this, because you don't have to teach them how to read Spanish. Because otherwise, you have to teach them how to read Spanish conventions first, right? You have it's a C before an I and E, but it changes to a Z when it's before at the end of a syllable. And there's all these really weird things where the letters change based on the position of where it's at the word. Is it before an A or is it before an I? And that's all about Spanish. And it makes sense for Spanish, because Spanish has this history where sounds changed and they kind of got stuck like that. Same thing with English. We pronounce things differently. We don't say knicht anymore. We say night. Knight in shining armor. But we still spell it like that because of its history. So I realized, well, it's easier. It's easier to teach people, because I don't have to teach them how to deal with the C's that change into Q's, or the C's changing to Z's, or the HU's. So I got to skip a lot of that and just focus more on the actual sound. But what I do still do is I still represent the morphology of the word. I still keep to the history of where that word comes from. So like the word tonati, it's pronounced tonati in the Huasteca, but we know it comes from the word tonatiu, right? In older times. And the W just changes to an H in the Huasteca.
And for listeners who don't know, what does tonati mean?
It's a sun, the sun or day, your sun or day. Yeah. And so I still write it with a W to represent that it used to be there. And not only does it represent that it used to be there, it also matches up with center varieties. So now you don't have like 10 different ways to write one word. It can be all done with one same system, right? So if I write the word cachtoli, that's the word for 15. I'll put 2 L's because it comes from cachtol plus the li. So I keep to where the word comes from, more than just pure sound. Because if we did that for English, it wouldn't make sense. Like, we'd have British people spell the word car without an R. They'd spell C-A. Yeah. And you need 10 different vowel sounds. It'd just be a mess. So English doesn't do that. And almost no one's saying we need to change the way we spell English.
Yeah.
And so when we give too much into that in Nahuatl, then we're focusing so much on small towns and their particular way of pronouncing it that you lose the ability to all be together a little bit. So yeah, I incorporated the new system because it's got a lot of advantages to it.
The one thing that I'm still struggling with, though, with the new system is when there's a W at the end of the word. And I'm like, well, is that just an H or?
It's just an H in the if you're pronouncing it Huasteco style, it's just an H. If you're pronouncing it Central style, it's pronounced like a W. Okay. Yeah, that's about it.
So that would make sense using tonati as an example. So it'd be tonatiu or tonati.
That's right.
Okay. Nice. That makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I use your book and your videos along with the classes that Diego does on YouTube. And for me, that's worked like perfectly. I think
Awesome.
that anybody out there who's listening right now, if you want to get into Nahuatl and you don't live in California, you don't have access to attend these classes in person, I would try that out. But do you offer classes personally on Zoom, or is that other people within your organization that are doing the Zoom classes?
Most actively doing that are other people within the organization doing that. I did it once last year with the whole COVID thing starting, and we've been holding off on in-person classes, which is our best method of teaching. That we all of our styles and methods are based on teaching in person, and teaching online it's just not the same experience. But I did do it last summer, and I'm considering doing it again this summer because there were a lot of people asking for me to do it again, offer that again. And yeah, they're good, but there are like 100 people that showed up. That I made enrollment up to about 100 people.
Wow.
And a good number stuck through. So yeah, there's definitely the need for that to happen.
That's inspiring to hear, because that's one thing about learning a language, right? Is it takes commitment, it takes practice, it takes, a level of really wanting to do it. And I don't know, I think some people just think like, well, I just want to learn how to say, my name is this. And then they just bounce on the class and they're happy with that. And that's fine, if that's all you have time for. But, I teach a lot about the calendar system, and I see the same thing with the calendar system is I wouldn't say most, but a lot of people just want to know what day they were born on.
The day. Okay. Yeah.
And they don't, they don't really care like how the whole system functions and how the sun is observed and what all the names mean. They're just like, just tell me what day I'm born.
I'm good at that.
Yeah. So it's inspiring to hear that a lot of people stuck it out, because that's one thing when you're learning a language. And like you said, when because I used to hold little a study circle at my house. People would come over and we would just have like a little study group. Yeah. But people would come and go, right? And it's like you were saying, I was trying to do it like as linear lessons. So by the time lesson 4 was around, you had new people show up, and it's like, man,
what do we do?
Got to start from the very beginning. Are the people who've already gone through it going to get bored and leave? Or are they going to see the value in repeating it? How far back should I go? Yeah. So I think your strategy of just being like, here's a set amount of classes, here's the beginning, here's the end, and you need to show up. And if you want to start, here's when we start, right? Like, here's the next round of classes. Because you can't come in on class number 5, because then you'll be like, well, I don't even know what's going on.
Well, when we were doing in-person classes in Los Angeles, we did actually find a way to accommodate for everyone, because that's what we just had to be able to do. Because we were in a space where we were getting a lot of publicity, and so we'd have at least 5 new people every single Sunday. So we found a system where we had one teacher dedicate themselves to be the intro day, first day teacher.
So like an onboarding. If it was your first class, you had like the onboard people would go over there.
But then there's other problems where there's 3 classes going on at the same time in one room. And so they'd be like, well, we can't hear because this group's having a lot of fun and enjoying their learning, and we're doing like grammar and
yeah.
So there's a lot of logistical things. I'd love to hear what other community-based classes, how they figure it out. But if we have enough people, I think that's just a system that would work.
Well, my dream is, hopefully COVID subsides and I'm able to make Café con Nahuatl not only a web series, but actually a weekly, like in-person gathering. And honestly, I wish it could be more than weekly, because the way I learn best is just through total immersion.
Total immersion, of course.
And one thing that's been helping me is there's the Facebook group, but they also have a YouTube page. Victoriano Teposteco, I think he's always posting onto it. And you're part of it too, right? It's the Seome Tlahtolli.
Nechikoli Seome Tlahtolli.
Yeah. That group is great because you got those videos of just people talking. And what I do is I download them and I convert them to MP3s. And when I'm out driving, I just listen.
Oh, wow.
And it helps me out because, you know, I don't understand everything, obviously, but I'll just catch myself like, oh man, I'm not even concentrating, but I know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's just there all the time. And I think that helps me the most. So I'm always encouraging people to go check out those videos.
Yeah, and that's why I tell people at the beginning of my classes, like, by the way, if you've got any talent, consider learning Nahuatl and using your talent with it, you know? If you know how to make music, if you know how to make videos, if you know how to just animate, make video games, whatever skill you got going on there, consider doing it with Nahuatl or working with us to do it. Because there's a big lack of multimedia material out there, you know? I have some Huasteco friends, but who live in the city, so they want to teach their kids to speak, and they actually want to teach their kids to speak Nahuatl, and their kids want to learn how to speak Nahuatl. But if it's just you and one parent and no one else around you speaking it, it's hard. But at least if there were multimedia available, it'd be one more resource. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, we don't have. There's no children's books in Nahuatl that you can easily find. You know, you can't just go to the Mexican equivalent of Barnes and Noble and find a Nahuatl book out there. You know? And if you do, it's history, not kids' books in Nahuatl.
Yeah.
And same thing. That's why I think they did Sesame Street in Nahuatl, and that got a good amount of views because it's the one of its kind. It just isn't that many materials like that. So anyone listening, consider helping out the Nahuatl revitalization in any method that you think you could support.
Absolutely. And what would you say, what made you pick Nahuatl specifically? Like out of all the other, the languages, cause I know what drew me to Nahuatl. And it's because it's like directly related to my family, right? Like my family tree goes like straight back to Tenochtitlan and Atzacoalco. Like we found exactly where our family comes from. And so that really made me inspired to learn Nahuatl. But I'm always curious, like what makes other people want to learn Nahuatl?
Yeah, well, my background, it's a privilege, but also unfortunate. Most of my native background is Tequesche background. And, a lot of my ancestry I've researched goes back. We haven't moved very much. We're all comes from the same general area that are all Tequesche based backgrounds. And no one knows exactly what we spoke.
Oh, wow.
We were a small group, mostly semi-nomadic, and all the rebellions that happened back in the day really screwed us over. In some aspects, and then the arrival of Guadalajara just brought so many Spaniards to Jalisco, like so many that Spanish quickly overtook the local languages. Like we're talking about, like by the 1700s, almost nothing was spoken left of our language. So we have this mystery, like what is it that was spoken? Well, there's a priest who wrote a book about the grammar of Nahuatl spoken in Tonalá, Guadalajara. When you look at it grammatically, it's the same, very similar to the one spoken in Jalisco today, or last century, in the Tuxpan area, where they have this low ending that makes things plural. And only varieties in the west coast of Mexico have it. So it's like, oh, that's not Central Nahuatl, that's actually a Jalisco Nahuatl. So for sure, some of my ancestors spoke Nahuatl. They might have picked it up because of the priests. They might have picked it up because of the Tlaxcaltecas. Just all the support to establishing Nahuatl back then. For whatever reason, at least I know some of my ancestors spoke Nahuatl. So I'm like, well, it just made sense for me. Just being the language, the unifying language, and of course people will say, well, yeah, it was unifying through violence, but that's how the whole world speaks any language. But it was unifying for trade and for positive things too in older times. And so it's just something that made a lot of sense to me.
So as a teacher of Nahuatl, are there any specific moments that stand out that you're like, made you feel really good? Like, yeah, that's why I'm doing this.
People are always so thankful. And people give me more credit than I think I need sometimes, and I'm like, no, just you guys put in the effort. Yeah, I'm teaching, but I'm proud of everyone all the time who just put in the effort to get this far and to be their own teachers and to lead their own groups now. I haven't had many we've done a couple ceremonies, for like graduation or congratulations on getting this far and giving certificates out and things like that. But they're all good moments whenever we're able to come together as our group, because our group involves not just the teachers but people who are just supportive and who are always there. And because we grew together, we became our own community in that sense. Just whenever we were able to come together in positive ways has always been very inspirational, I'd say.
That's awesome. Well, I'm a big fan of you and the work that you do and the work that the organization does. I'm grateful that you guys are around doing what you do. Is there you guys have a website? Is there a website that people can go to if they're interested?
We do have a website. If you just type in Tlahtoltapazolli on Google, you'll get my website that has resources, which is more of like links to a lot of my archives of my PDFs and just a couple of different materials. There's a chapter of the Florentine Codex you can read where I put in this feature where if you hover over a word, it'll give you the translation.
Oh, that's
right
awesome.
away. Yeah. So things like that I have, it'll link you to apps that we've built over time. A lot of different random projects, audios, stories that we've translated. You'll find it on that website. But Facebook, if you're on Facebook, that's where we post like most of the new things happening. And then our friend Cuitlawak, he's one of our teachers, but he also runs his own teaching group called Speak Nawatl.
Okay.
And his is very active on social media. So if you want to just hear general things about where's there a class anywhere I can take, you'll see he'll definitely post that. He's very active on social media. For us, if there's this big announcement about a class coming up, it would be posted on Facebook.
Okay. Well, cool. So, and then your book, Learn Nahuatl, can people order that through your website, or do they get it through Amazon or local bookstores?
Looks like Amazon has it. But if you just search it on Google, there's other affiliate groups you can buy it from. That if you don't want to necessarily get it from Amazon, there are other groups that sell it as well. But yeah, the general easy one for everyone is probably Amazon. Are you already gonna work on a third edition? You seem pretty busy. It seems like you probably have a third edition already in the works. No, not at the moment. I'm thinking I'm working on other projects. I'm hoping to publish some other works out there. So, we have there's Nahuatl stories, Nahuatl prayers, things like that need to get out there, I think. But I waited at least 5 years before I published the second edition. If there's a third one, I'd probably wait at least 5 more years for that. Nice. Well, I look forward to it. Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on, man. It's great to talk to you. Do you have like your own social media? People can follow you online. Do you have a Twitter or anything? Not really. I'm not really too active I'm not really good at following up on things, but I do love answering questions. If anyone ever has questions, my email is onetequesche@gmail.com. So, I've gotten a lot of good questions over the years, people that want to collaborate on things. So, I feel emails worked out pretty well for that. Sweet. And how do you spell that? The number 1, Tequesche spelled TECUEXE @gmail.com. Awesome. Yeah, and I can vouch for that. You're really good at answering questions because I'm always bugging you with random questions. I love doing it because a question means someone's interested and actively, looking for that knowledge. So I love doing as much as I can. Well, cool, man. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Our very first return guest on Tales from Atlantis, Yan Garcia. You could check out his book, Learn Nahuatl, Language of the Aztecs and Modern Nahuas. I highly recommend it. And until next time, Timoitase. Timoitase. Wan xikilamiki, tlemelawak nohkia pahtli, amo nochipa welik, san kena nochipa kuali. And remember, the truth is like medicine. It doesn't always taste good, but it's always good for you.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Aztlantes, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromaztlantes.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timoitase.